an object with a posts key and a total posts key. So in that object, I'll add posts, and that will be the posts I fetched here, and total posts, which will be total posts. Now, posts will not be returned like this, because in there would be fields like _ID or created at, which hold data formats that are not understood by GraphQL. So instead, I will add map here, and you'll learn about map, for example, in the JavaScript refresher, which allows me to transform every element in that array. So here, I will return a new object for every post, which will generally be the same. So I will pull out the existing elements on the post document, but then I will override the ID with p_id to string to return a string. And for created at, I will use p created at to ISO string, and the same for updated at, where I will use p updated at to ISO string. And this is now how I will transform my posts, every single post in the posts array, and therefore the overall array. This is the backend, this is the schema and the resolver set up for getting posts. Now let's test this on graphical. Here, let me reload that page, and there I will run a new query, which will be called posts. And let's say there I'm interested in both the posts and total posts. Posts is an array of complex objects, so there I also need to specify what I want to get out of there. Let's say I'm interested in the ID, the title, and the content. And now I hit Control Enter, and I get not authenticated, which is correct because I'm not sending a token here. So that is the next step. We'll send this request from the front end, add our token, and then, of course, also render our posts. So let's use that query here from the front end. And for that, I'll go to my React application, of course. There, the feed.js file. And here we have to scroll up a little bit to load posts. There we have some pagination logic, which we can ignore for now. And then I'll write my GraphQL query here, which is a JavaScript object, where I have a query, which now is that multi-line string. And in that multi-line string, I now will start with curly braces right away. And in there, just as I did it in graphical, and therefore we can, of course, again, copy that, I'll look for posts. This is the name of my query. And in there, this happens to return this post data object, which has posts and total posts. And for every post, I'm interested in the ID, title, content, image URL, also creator, and also created at. Creator, again, is a complex object, and there I'm interested in the name. So this is the data I need to render my posts efficiently. Now to run that query, let's change that URL down there. And you know which URL that is. It's localhost 8080/GraphQL. The method will be post, of course. Headers is the token, but also the content type, which should be application JSON. And of course, I need to add my body here. And that body will be stringified with the JSON package, and that will be that GraphQL query I wrote up there. And please note again that we see the entire flexibility of GraphQL doing its job here. We're fetching exactly that post data we need. We don't fetch things like the creator email, which we don't need. We don't fetch the updated at field, which we don't need. We only fetch what we need. And we actually don't even need the image URL here, now that I think about it. We're not rendering that image on that starting page. So really, we only fetch what we need, and we use GraphQL to its fullest potential here. But back to our request. I'm now sending this request. Now, again, handling errors like this will not succeed. Instead, we want to handle it as we did down there. We don't need to check for validation errors though, because in this query we can't send incorrect data. So we'll simply check if we got any other errors, and I'll then say fetching posts failed. And otherwise we'll have our posts, and we can't access them on REST data posts though, as you know. Instead, if we have a look at our schema, our post data will be found on data, then posts, because that's the name of the query. That will be an object of this type with another field of posts in there, and then we can drill into our post data. So here, the posts, the final posts can be found on restdata.data.posts.posts. This is the query, and this is then the posts field in the return data of the query, and then we can let React do its job. For the total posts, it's all the REST data, posts, and then it's not total items, but total posts. I renamed that on my backend. If we now save that and we go back to our React application, we can already see it. That error is coming from the user status, but behind that we see our posts are getting rendered. We see the username, so that is all working. And now let's also add the code to add a new post to this page immediately, before we then also add pagination and then also have a look at how we can get our image onto the server. So let's quickly add the code to add a new post immediately. We do that in the feed.js file of the front-end code in the finish added handler. And there we scroll down to the place where we create our post object. We're not actually doing anything with that thus far, so that's time to change. So there, with this post, I prepared some code which you can now use. You can just copy it in and replace the this set state statement with the attached code. And thereafter, go back to your application and add another cup, for example. Also hot, and hit accept, and you see that cup here too. Pagination is not working, but we'll take care about that later. For now, we can add that, and we can load our posts in general. Now that we're able to fetch our posts through GraphQL, let's add pagination again. How does that work with GraphQL? Turns out, not too difficult. We start on our GraphQL schema again, because there we'll need to change something on our posts query, because it is the posts query where we want to add pagination, right? We want to be able to paginate through all the posts. Therefore, the posts query needs an argument. It needs an argument that allows us to define the page we are on. And I'll name that page. You can name it however you want. And this will be of type integer. Now, with that argument added in the schema, in our resolver, we can implement pagination. There, in my posts resolver, my arguments now will have that page property, so I can retrieve it with destructuring. And after checking whether I'm authenticated or not, I now need to set up pagination, or I need to find out which page I'm on and use that. Now, first of all, I'll quickly check if page, if this is not set, because if it is not set, so if it is undefined, I'll set it equal to 1, so that I always start on page 1 in case I don't specify any other page. As a next step, we can define the per page variable, which is 2, as it was in our REST API scenario. You could theoretically also fetch this as an argument. I'll hard-code it here for simplicity reasons, because this would primarily something we would have to manage in the front end with a drop-down offering the user different page sizes and so on. So I'll hard-code it here, and now we have per page, we have the current page. Now we can use that here when we find the posts. And you already learned that you can paginate with skip and limit. So skip and limit is what you can add here. And in skip, you want to skip your current page minus 1 times per page. So if you're on page 2, you have 2 minus 1, which is 1 obviously, and you skip 1 times 2, so the first 2 items, the 2 items that were on page 1. You don't just want to skip though, you also want to limit, and you limit the result set to the amount of pages of items you want to render per page by adding per page as an argument here. And that is it. This is pagination in place on the server side. Now in the front end, there we already have some logic for the pagination. If we go to load posts, there I do already get my page variable. Now I just need to send that with my query, and for that on the post query I can set page equal to, well, the page I calculate up there. Since this is a number, I also don't need to wrap that in double quotation marks. Let me save all that, also make sure the backend code is saved, and let's reload our front-end application. Whoops, for that I should restart the server. And indeed here, I got pagination in place. Now when I add a new post, to make sure that it does not show up as a third element when we only want to have two, I will go back to my React code and there to the finish edit handler, and here in set state where you find that unshift statement, simply add updated posts pop in front of that. And that is all. This will remove one element and add the new one at the beginning. And now let's give this a try. Let's add another duck. Choose the duck image. Also very lovely. Accept this. And here is the another duck, another cup. Here is the rest. And this is exactly the data we find in the database too. We got two another ducks, just in the case you got confused. So this is working. Let's now work on the image upload, because that obviously is something very interesting which we haven't touched on thus far for our GraphQL API. How does uploading data work now? The thing is, GraphQL only works with JSON data. You can find a couple of articles, third-party packages that help you with getting data through GraphQL, but in the end, one of the cleanest solutions is to use a classic endpoint, like a REST endpoint, where you send your image to, and then let that endpoint store the image and return the path to the image, and then send another request with that path to the image and your other data to your GraphQL endpoint. And this is the solution I'll implement here. I'll implement it in app.js, because you could outsource this into a separate file, but it'll be the only other route we add here. And there I'll register a new route on my app for incoming put requests, because I plan to send that image with a put request, to slash, let's say, post image. You can name this path however you want. There we have our traditional middleware function. I hope you still know that, even though we haven't used it in the last lectures. And there I'll first of all check if we don't have a file. Now how can I check that? Well, I still have Multer in place. We added that in the REST API module, and Multer is the package which takes our multi-part form data requests and extracts a file and stores it in the images folder. And I still have that in place. So all my files still will be extracted, and Multer then populates the file object with information about the extracted file. Now, if this is not set, then I'll just return a response here with a status of 200 and a message where I say, no file provided. You could set an error code here, but actually this scenario is fine for me, as you will see when we later edit a post, because there we might or might not add a new image. Maybe we stick to the old one, maybe we did choose a new one. And then this is one way of handling both cases. If we do have a request file, we can get some data from it though. And of course we want to clear an existing image if there is one. For that, I'll create a new function here, or actually I have that function in the feed.js controller already. I can copy that from there. The clear image function at the bottom of the feed.js file. I'll move that into app.js. This depends on the fs package and on the path package, the path module, path is already imported. Now I'll also import fs here. And now with that all imported, back in our put request here, I'll check for the existence of a body field which is named old path, which simply means that an old path was passed with the incoming request, in which case I want to clear my old image and I'll pass in the old path, because then we added a new image. We can be certain about that after this if check. And then we should also have an old path which we delete so that we don't keep the old image and the new image. Instead, we delete the old image here and then only keep the new image which was stored by Multer. And then at the end here, I will return a response with a status code of 201, and that differentiates it from this response. And here I will add some JSON data, let's say a message, file stored, but more importantly, I'll add a file path, or however you want to name it, which is request file path. And this is the path where Multer stored the image. And this is the path we can then use in the front end. With this added on the back end, we can now work on the front end to use this REST API endpoint. And this also shows you that you can use REST and GraphQL concepts together. It's not like a hard decision you have to make. You can use the best for a given problem. So now we can use that on the front end, and we want to use it in this finish added handler. So the feed.js file of the React app, in the finish added handler, there I'm preparing some form data. And this form data does not get a title and content anymore, but it will still get the image. Additionally though, I also want to check if we are in edit mode. So if this state added post, if that is true, and then I will append the old path field, which is this state added post, which is the post we're currently editing, image path. This is a field we're setting when we're loading all posts. There, when we load all posts, we also set the image path. And this is a field which we therefore also should set when we edit our post. So there, when I create a new post, I should also add image path here and get that from create post. That should be my image URL, which I get there. And that is also something I need to request. Therefore, image URL is something I do request here. So I do have it available. So I'm setting this image path. I have that available. This will be the path of the old image on the server. And now with that, I have my form data set up. Now, before I send my GraphQL query, I will therefore send another query to HTTP localhost 8080, but there to /post image, so to this new endpoint I defined. And the method here will be put, because on my backend here, I simply defined this to handle put requests. You could, of course, also argue to use post, but since I'll replace the old image, put makes a lot of sense. I'll then add my headers. Now, regarding authorization here, we want to make sure that our auth middleware actually runs first on the server so that we know if the user is authenticated. And if isAuth is false, then we can certainly throw a new error here, not authenticated, so that we protect this route as well. So now on the front end, we need to add our authorization header, and I will just copy the headers from my GraphQL request because the headers actually are the same. And the body is now here my form data. This fetch request will be made first. Then, after it has been made, I'll get back a response, some response data, where I'll parse the body, and thereafter, I'll have my file response data. You can name this however you want. And in here, I now can extract the image URL by accessing file response data and their file path, because in my endpoint, I am setting this file path key here. And I can now use that in the GraphQL query. So now let me grab all that GraphQL code here, this code up to the then block, cut it, and move it into this then block, and then remove this semicolon and chain this then block here. I just need to return this fetch call so that the next then block refers to the result of this fetch block here. So now I do have my image URL. Now I just need to pass it here for my GraphQL query, image URL. And now we should have a setup where we are able, for now, to at least create new posts. Editing is something we'll work on later. So let's try that out. Let's try creating a new post. And first of all, on the server, I'll clear all the images in the images folder so that we can tell whether this works or not. So back here, I need to log in again. Let's quickly do that. And let's create a new duck, a new post, but it can be a duck with an image, hopefully. Let's choose our duck JPEG. This is a lovely duck again. Accept. And I get this error regarding payload too large. This is actually coming from an error on my side. That fetch request here, where I send to post image, I should not set the content type to application JSON there. Otherwise, it will be parsed as JSON data, and that does not work for my binary data here. So after removing this header, let's try this again with another duck here. Add that image. So lovely. Accept this. And now it uploads this first, and we can prove that by looking into images. Here's our duck image. So this works, and it still creates that post, which you can see here. Next challenge is to make sure that we can click that view button and view the detail page for one post. And this again is a challenge for you. Implement something, some schema or a query in the schema of your GraphQL API and add a resolver that takes the ID of a post and loads that post. You can then work on the front end too if you feel bold. Otherwise, focus on the back end. We'll do it together in the next lecture.